Hello, I am Christopher Michael Cooper the second. I'm representing Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated, as well as the fourth district and the chapter Delta Alpha, as well as Mu Iota. I'm currently a member of the Delta Alpha chapter. With that, I am also chairman of the fourth district's voter registration, education, and mobilization team. And tonight we have Judge Terri Jamison. So, with that, I would like to introduce her. And if you could, ma'am, go ahead and introduce yourself and then give us a little bit about your background, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Cooper, and also to Omega Psi Phi Fraternity for the opportunity to be on with you tonight. I am Terri Jamison, grew up in McDowell County, West Virginia, graduated from high school at Welch High School. After high school, worked for a short time for the Department of Welfare, and then went to become one of the few women that became an underground coal miner. So I'm a third generation coal miner and had to move to Ohio to look for new opportunities when the mines closed. So when I came here, I landed a couple of jobs and then finally um, became an office manager for a Black owned insurance agency, Howard Tyler State Farm Agency, and worked for him for about 2.5 years. And after that, he said to me, "Why don't you get your own business?" So I started my own insurance agency. I owned and operated my own insurance agency for 16 years as a small business owner, facing a lot of challenges, making payroll, training staff, all of the things that small business owners face. Toward the end of that career, I decided to go back to finish my undergraduate degree, which I started at Bluefield State in West Virginia, and I finished at Franklin University with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and a minor in Human Resources Management. After finishing, I still was unsettled about staying in the area that I was in. So I decided to sell the business and enrolled in Capital Law School. Graduated from law school, passed the bar the first time, did some really critical work with the Franklin County Public Defender's Office, did an internship with the Civil Rights Section of the AG's office, and also an internship with the Bureau of State Hearings, hearing OWF food stamp and Medicaid appeals. After leaving the public defender's office, I decided to hang out my own shingle, and I practiced law not only in Franklin County but in many counties across the state, and represented individuals in every type of criminal case except a death penalty case. Represented individuals in domestic, juvenile, probate law at the trial and the appellate level. So, ran for judge in 2012, was successfully elected to the Domestic Relations and Juvenile Court, where I served for more than 8 years, and was elected to the Ohio Court of Appeals, where I currently serve now. I'm married.
And
We,
okay,
yeah, so we have 3 sons, 8 grandchildren, and 1 great granddaughter.
excellent, excellent. Um, with that, I kind of want to pivot into keep in mind that we represent the states of Ohio and West Virginia. So I can see that you've definitely got your roots in West Virginia, and you've also got your roots here with us. I kind of want to talk about just in terms of the basics, like up to our community in general, everybody. Why is it important to have a Supreme Court judge from, more specifically, our community, and what does that really mean for us as a people?
Well, as a people, it means that you have access. I think that when we go to court and we don't see anyone that looks like us, we automatically assume that the deck is stacked against us.
Mhm.
Having practiced particularly criminal law around the state, oftentimes I would be the only black face in the room and maybe my defendant. It does not give you a sense that there's anyone there that understands your circumstances, what possibly led you to be in that situation. And it's important for public confidence and public trust to see people that look like us.
Excellent. Now, when we talk about our community having a Supreme Court judge or even just representation, um, are there many, will you have many other peers from our community?
We have one African American justice out of seven at this time, Justice Melody Stewart, who was elected in 2018. She's the first African American woman elected to the Supreme Court. We had Yvette McGee Brown appointed, but she was unsuccessful in her election bid. So, if elected, I will be the third African American female. And why that's critical, in 2019, along with several other judges across the state, we started the Ohio Black Judges Association, and we started to look to see how many of us there are representing uh, the counties. Out of more than 700 judges, we found that there was less than 60, so not even 10% of the judges that sit on the court in Ohio are of African American descent, and there are only six Latino judges in the entire state. So
Hmm.
we know that we're not represented well.
Okay. So that kind of leads me into, I guess, a little bit more within my question. One of the things that a lot of brothers express to me, and that I hear a lot through different forms of community service with the chapter and also my work with the NAACP and other organizations, is that a lot of times um, people, the community at large, feels that when we go before judges, the sentencing is oftentimes disproportionate or unfair. So my question to you would be, in having someone from our community, you understand our background, you understand our struggles and our challenges. When we have a Black woman and a Black person, a person of color, as a Supreme Court judge, does that really impact or affect what we perceive as unfair or disproportionate sentencing?
Well, I would say that we need to look at the crux of the issue, which is the sentencing structure is made up by the legislature. The legislature is the one that determines what the sentences should be. However, when you go before a judge for sentencing, because I've represented a lot of criminal defendants, when you go, they're looking at past criminal history, whether or not you were on probation or community control or parole at the time that the incident happened. Do you have strong roots and ties to the community? Was it a violent offense? Was there a gun that was used? Because when a firearm is used, you have gun specifications that can be added on top of the actual charge. So it's really critical to know your criminal history, and that's really important. Did you appear for your last hearings? Have you have been an absconder while you're on probation? An absconder is a person that fails to report to the probation department once you've been placed on community control, or you abscond from the parole authority once you're released from prison. There are so many issues and things that people look at when determining sentences. The victim gets to make an impact statement. So there's a lot that goes into determining what the sentence should be. And oftentimes, the legislature has already written the rule for what the sentence will be.
Okay.
So there's
Excellent.
not a lot of judicial discretion.
Okay, I understand that. Now, another question I would have is, I hear why is people, laws change, things happen, and oftentimes I will get a call based on my work, I said here in the fraternity and also in the NAACP with different brothers from my district and my chapter. This law isn't fair. This law was made to go after me. What impact does a judge have on things like whether it be gerrymandering and redistricting, or even some of like when we see, curfew laws that don't make sense or laws that seem almost pointed toward minorities. What impact does a judge have on those laws?
Well, I would just say for the Supreme Court, you need to understand they are bound to only constitutional questions and cases that are of great impact to the community. Those type of charges that you're speaking of, those
Hmm.
are coming out of the legislature. One thing that we can do, and a lot of times we don't, is we don't follow legislation through the legislative arm, through the government. And there are opportunities for you to go and to give testimony of why the law should not be enacted, why it will have a punitive effect on and a disproportionate effect on men and women of color. So opportunities to give testimony are key. So there are ways that you can get online and you can look at bills and you can tell where they are in the process, and you can submit a request to go and give testimony to try to impact it before it becomes a law. Once it becomes a law, the only question that the Supreme Court can answer is whether or not that law is constitutional. And it takes four judges vote, justices on the Supreme Court vote to even get the court to hear the case. Because the Supreme Court is not like a trial court or an appellate court where you can just file a case and you can get in. You file what's called a jurisdiction memo. And when you file that, the Supreme Court reviews it and they determine whether or not they're going to take the case, whether or not it's a constitutional question or a question of great public interest. And that's where amicus briefs, the briefs of friends of the court, can help the court to determine whether or not they should answer these questions because they can show that it's going to impact a large number of people.
Okay, excellent. So another question is, when we talk about electing a Supreme Court judge, I have times, even having, spoken about having met you before. If I'm in a barber shop, if I'm kind of a sneakerhead, so I'm always at the shoe store. People say, well, like, I don't get in trouble. I'm not going to the Supreme Court. What are you telling me for? And so, can you kind of help me or help the community at large to understand what impact you have on our daily lives and why it's important to show up and support you or to support anybody who's running at this level?
Well, the Supreme Court is critical to the acceptance or the admission of men and women to the practice of law. It's also critical to whether or not someone's going to be disciplined. Those cases come to the Supreme Court and they decide whether or not discipline is necessary for lawyers. You're also looking at cases of constitutional question. You mentioned redistricting. That will come back in 2024 because that's a constitutional question that has
Mhm.
not been answered. The map that we are using now has been held to be unconstitutional, and the federal federal court decided that we could use it for 1 year, this year only. So
Mhm.
the next process will be to go back to the drawing board and start looking at redistricting again. We know that voting rights are another thing that are being targeted. Those are going to be constitutional questions. Whether you believe in Roe versus Wade or not, it's been overturned. That's going to be a constitutional question that comes back to the court on whether or not you have the right to privacy in your medical decisions. That's going to come back. And then in the decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion that said he wanted to overturn Brown versus Board of Education, and he wanted to overturn um, a case that deals with women's ability to have contraception. So all of these things are going to be constitutional questions that are going to come to the Supreme Court. And whether you think it's important or not, maybe you're not the one that's going to have an abortion. Maybe you're not the one that needs contraception. But Why are we forcing men and women to have children that they cannot afford and cannot take care of? Because in the Dobbs decision, the author wrote that Roe versus Wade should be overturned so that they can have more domestic product for adoption. So he referred to babies as domestic product. And being a Black person in this community, when I saw that descriptor, it immediately took me back to the history of our ancestors when they were taking our children from us and giving them to other people to raise. So I look at all of these things and the impact that it's going to have in Black communities. In Black communities, women are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. Our children are more likely to die from sudden infant death syndrome or before they turn a year old. That's why we have Celebrate One and many other organizations. So we have to make sure that we're aware of the things that affect us and why it's important.
Okay, excellent. And with that, I kind of want to pivot into when we when we look at something like Roe versus Wade. I kind of think about there was a small child here, maybe about 10, who was pregnant and ultimately forced to leave the state in order to have an abortion. And the pregnancy is even the result of pedophilia and molestation. To kind of pivot from there, I also think about the high death rate that we're seeing when mothers are having babies. And now I'm looking at one of our other frat brothers, Brother Ben Crump, who's representing a lady in Louisiana who was ultimately, because of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, is being forced to have a dead child. And the probability of her living through this pregnancy is actually very low. So, my question would be, when you're faced with things like that, those are things that I can see that impacts our community. Is that kind of why we need to support someone like you? Because of course you understand what it is to have a child, what it is to have options, and at the same time how it's impacting. Am I connecting those things right? And then are we on the same, I guess, the same page as to why it's important for our community to have a representation for our community?
Well, I can't really answer that question because we do have a case in the Ohio Supreme Court right now on
Okay.
Roe versus Wade. But what I can say um, is that we know that mortality is higher for Black women than anyone else. We know this. To take away discretion from a doctor on whether or not how they advise their client, that's going to be a constitutional question. It's going to come up. Um, are doctors going to step back because they're afraid of a lawsuit? Are they going to step back because they're afraid of criminal charges being filed against them? So it's an I can't talk about it any more than that, but
Exactly.
it is something that definitely is going to be a question that we're going to see.
Okay. Kind of going into my final questions here. If we should support you, and of course, we thank you for all of your appearances and your presence with us here at the Brotherhood. But as a community for the state of Ohio, if we support you, when we show up to vote, what can we expect once you're elected?
Well, what you can expect is that I'm going to follow the law. I'm going to rule on the law. And it's our Supreme Court matters more than it ever has. And the reason I know this, there have been a number of organizations that have come forward to support Supreme Court candidates to make sure that we have the funds necessary to run a campaign. And it matters because I'm disappointed in my opponent. Um, he commented on Roe versus Wade, which was a clear signal to his stance on how he believes. And I was disappointed because he chose to compare Roe versus Wade to a case called Plessy versus Ferguson and the Dred Scott decision, which dealt with slavery and equal schooling. And he compared Roe versus Wade to that. So it's unclear how he would be able to rule in an unbiased manner on these type of cases. What they can expect from me is the same thing they've always expected to me. I'm in the community. I'm a community leader. I don't disappear after an election. I've received a PhD from Franklin University for community leadership, and that was based on the work that I specifically have done in the community. I've always been a community person. I've represented men and women. I've started programs while I was in domestic and juvenile court to help men and women become employed that owed their child support so that they did not have to go to jail, but they would be able to provide for themselves, provide for their children, and had the satisfaction of seeing many men and women to say, this is the first time I've ever had a job and an opportunity. So when you go outside the box and you're willing to start programs, and you're willing to work with individuals so that they can become um, great people in the society. Um, it's a hard thing for a man or a woman that has a child that they can't provide for. That's a hard
Mhm.
thing for them. And I began to hear them and I began to think, what can I do differently? So I gathered up community organizations. I actually brought them to the court once a month, let men and women come to the court, make applications to be involved in training, do parenting classes, be involved in opportunities to get their license reinstated, and finally to be able to get a job so that they could sustain themselves. That's the kind of person that I am, and that's what I would bring to the Supreme Court, that knowledge that we as a people deserve to be created equally and that we need fair access to the court.
Excellent. And then with that, I always ask, uh, when we go to vote in November, what do you want us to know about you and what do you want us to remember about you?
I just want you to remember that I'm just like you. I worked my way up from being a coal miner to the court. I went to school while I worked. I worked my way through law school. I didn't have a silver spoon put in my mouth. It's been hard work, determination, and the ability to keep moving forward. And I want to give that same opportunity to others. I mentor students, I bring them to the court. I've had interns. I've coached mock trial and moot court, been a judge on mock trial and moot court,
Mm-mm,
been an
mm-mm.
adjunct professor at Capital Law School. I sit on the board of Capital Law, but I still worship in our community right at the corner of Oak and Wilson. I still spend my time with my own people and understanding that I'm no better than anybody else, and that if I can give somebody a hand up, then they can also make great decisions and they have an opportunity to be whatever they want to be as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And then closing, just speaking here to our brotherhood, we'll be working in the eight major urban areas. You're well aware that we have chapters in every major urban area in Ohio and West Virginia. In conclusion, is there anything that you would like to say to them?
Well, well, Mr. Cooper,
Yes, we do.
my bailiff was a member of Omega Psi Phi, Mu Iota chapter,
Mhm,
which is where I really got involved with the Brotherhood. And we've done programming at the Juvenile Detention Center. The
mhm.
brothers have helped me to put toy drives together for kids for Christmas. We have worked together on many different things. I believe that I'm somebody that they can support, they can walk with, they can talk with. I'm reachable, and would love to be with you in any part of the state, to go door to door, whatever, a voter registration, whatever you're doing to make our community better.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your time. With that, I think we got a lot of great information covered. I will certainly make sure that the Brotherhood hears this. And again, we thank you for all the presence you've had with us. We thank you for all the times you've come out, and I thank you for all you've given us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.